Let's get started. We've got David here talking to us about what to expect when you're expecting PHP 7. After David's talk, we'll have lunch down in the Grand Ballroom, which is where the keynote was held. So.
Good morning. Yeah, it's still morning. I'm from East Coast, so it's a little weird. Like 2 hours is really awkward for me. Like 3 is fine. 2 and 1 hours, I'm all off. So yeah. So this talk, I probably should retitle it at this point because PHP 7 is out. But when I wrote it, it wasn't. But it's not so yeah, I'll leave it over to Dave. So for those who don't know me, my name is Davey, Shafik. I am the author of these fine books. The Certification Study Guide was recently updated to 5.6. I'm considering it 7, but they haven't released a cert yet, so I'm kind of jumping the gun on that. I'm a contributor to Zen Frameworks 1 and 2 PHP docs, and I now have 3 patches in internals. So I'm kind of tracking up there, which is cool. I'm the original creator of FAR, PHP archive, so if you ever use Composer and downloaded a FAR file, that was my idea. And I'm at Shafik on Twitter, so if you want to reach out to me, that's the best place to do it. I am a developer evangelist for Akamai. We run like 30% of the internet. So check us out at developer.akamai.com. There's really cool APIs, just some really cool technologies. I also always mention this when I speak, which is Prompt, which is an initiative to get people talking about mental health in our community, prompt.org. Check that out. All right, so let's get to PHP 7. So as I said, it's out. It has a logo. That means it's real. It was released December 3rd, so it's been out now, like a month and a half, I guess. Yeah, so about a month and a half. We're actually at 7.02 now. The number one question I get when I give this talk is what happens to PHP 6? You probably will see today some PHP 6 certified stickers floating around. The honest answer is that Unicode is hard, and we got to go to quagmire, and we decided to skip it. The funny answer is this. In PHP 5.3.0 to 5.3.10, if you do this, which is 0 in hex plus 1 plus 5, you end up with 7. So there's a buffer overflow thing happening there. So, yeah.
It should elaborate if this
Was it what, sorry?
On that bug. How do you heck?
So
What do you have to overflow to get 7?
So here's what happens. The parser was expecting spaces around the operator, and because there wasn't any, it would actually read the 1 twice rather than, yeah, so you end up with 7. It's a fun bug. Also, I have no idea where that S comes from. Just proves I do write these slides by hand. So the biggest thing that's going to impact you day to day is the removal of deprecated features. Now, hopefully this is not a big deal for you. Hopefully you've been reading those deprecated warnings for a while, and you're already moved off of some of this stuff. But alternative PHP tags, some people don't know these exist, but ASP tags and script tags were a thing. They're no longer a thing. Don't use them. Posits compatible regular expressions. I put this image in there the first time I gave this talk. Why the heck did I choose Legos for this? And the reason is Legos have been around forever, and since like 1958 or something, they've been compatible all the way up to today, which is really cool. And it's composite compatible. So yeah, see. So what that means is all of the ereg functions have been removed. So if you're still using those, you need to get off of them, and you need to use the preg functions instead. It's reasonably trivial. The Perl compatible ones are somewhat of a superset with some slight differences, so hopefully that's not too bad of a migration path. More importantly, to a lot of people, ext MySQL is dead. That means that all of the MySQL functions are removed. You can switch almost one-to-one to the MySQL I extensions. There are some minor differences in the API, and there's like 7 functions, I think, that did not make it into that API. I'm sort of kind of working on a compatibility shim for this, but I don't know if that's a good idea, and I may scrap it. But it's up on GitHub, so if you want to grab it before I delete the repo. I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't want to perpetuate this idea of keeping MySQL around, when it has insecurities and problems by just having MySQLi under it. My recommendation is to use MySQLi, the object-oriented interface, if you have to use MySQLi, or switch to PDF. But hopefully a lot of you are not using MySQL. This is a somewhat interesting one. It turns out when they wrote the spec, which they did with HHVM coming out, they did it for like 5.5, I think, they realized that you can actually have multiple default cases inside the switch, and the parser would allow that. And if you did that, the second one is the only one that would run. Can you guys read this okay? Is that got enough contrast to it? I'm not able to do anything about it, but so if you have a switch with 2 defaults, the first switch would just be skipped over as if it didn't exist, which potentially is a bug that is very hard to see. So now in 7, you get a fatal error, which is definitely better than some hard-to-find bug. But if you run into that, I don't know what you're doing to get to that point, but you were right, wrong code. I mean, it happens. All right, so the number one thing that has people excited about PHP 7 is performance. If you know nothing else about PHP 7, you probably know this. It is fast. It is really fast. So they have some benchmarks, and they actually had these like automated throughout the development of PHP 7. And so as they were making changes, they could see over time, were they positive in terms of performance. So there's a couple numbers on here. There is this here, which is the number of operations, the CPU operations that happen. There is the time that it took, which is on this line here, and then just bars to kind of make it. So that's the operations.
Question, when you say
Yes.
CPU operations, you mean instructions?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe not quite that level, I don't think. I think it's what the VM is running.
Okay.
But to run benchmark.php, which ships with every single version of PHP in the tarball, it used to take almost 12 billion instructions to do that, and it took 2.115 seconds. In April, I believe is when this was last updated, it took almost just over half a second. So we're talking 4 times faster. That's pretty impressive. And more importantly, you got down to under 6 billion instructions, so less than half. And a lot of this has to do with optimizations in the way the stuff is stored in memory. The way that they structured their data structures in the engine is much more, it's more lightweight, so you're using less memory, but also it's more performant because there's less indirection happening, so you end up doing less instructions. So you win on both fronts there. A little bit more practically speaking, the WordPress homepage, this is another benchmark, same sort of timeline, same numbers. So back when they first started, it took 7.7 seconds to run it over the top of the homepage, and just under 10 billion instructions. By the time they stopped, they were at 11 seconds. So 26 to 11. And again, the instructions now, we've actually gone 4 times lower, down to 2.5 billion. These are incredible numbers, it's really cool. So the long story short is, if you've been looking at HHVM, for some use cases it is still faster, for some use cases PHP 7 is faster, you need to check yourself. But on general workloads, PHP 7 is about 2.4x faster, or 59%, however you want to represent that, which is incredible, that's free. If you are on a very tight budget and you're running your own hardware, this means you can do way more with it, right? And I'm hoping this in and of itself will, yes?
I'm wondering what we have a test suite that runs in about 2 minutes. We ran it on 7 slower, ran it in 6 or 5. I'm wondering what we begin to look at. It's pretty generic.
Might be your Opcache setup.
Well, I mean, actually, I'll tell you, it's Firefox.
No, this is all the PHP.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, check your Opcache setup, especially if you move from APC to Opcache. But that would be the first place I would go.
Thank you.
There is no reason, it should be impossible, I want to say, for 7 to perform slower. It should be at least as performant. So yeah, I'm hoping that this will cause ISPs and such to upgrade faster, because they can squeeze more money out of all of their shared hosts by being able to put more people on every server, right? So I'm hoping that's enough to push it through, we'll see. All right, so moving on to kind of new stuff. The AST. So this is not going to be something most of you see, but it will impact you in ways going forward. It's really, really important. So AST is the abstract syntax tree. And what this is an intermediate representation of your code between when it's parsed by the engine and when it is compiled and run by the engine. And what it does is it makes sure that every single possible branch is represented in this tree-like fashion. So if you actually look at this, you have like some sort of statement, you have a return, set a variable, then you have a while loop, you have all these branches coming in here, assignments, et cetera, et cetera. Don't really care too much about this, like you don't have to get into this, but what's important about this is that it allows for much easier implementation of future features. So as 7.1 comes around, 7.2, 5, whatever, it's going to be much, much more easy to put large features in, especially without the kind of issues of backwards compatibility that we had with some of the 5X releases. So this is important, but you're not going to run into it day to day. Now there is an extension for kind of exploring the AST, and a lot of people are using that to do things like checking for optimizations. They're also using it to actually check sort of proof of concepts as well. So it's kind of pretty cool. It's good for static analysis type stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that can happen around it, and we will see those things happen. It also means performance can improve even more. As we take some more time with the AST and we look for shortcuts we can take, it's going to be just much more, much less likely to cause issues because it's well laid out. Uniform variable syntax. This is, for me, the most important change and the one that's going to trip you up because it's the hardest to spot. So basically, variables are a problem. And most people go, well, we don't use those. They're, everyone knows it's bad practice. But the truth is we actually do. There's a lot of things that are considered variables that we don't think about. For example, variable array keys, right? So in PHP 5.6 and below, there are some really weird rules about how we handle situations like this, where if you have a $$ something, it would read the right-hand side, then the left-hand side. Whereas in 7, it's always left to right. So let me show you some examples. What's great is it's fairly easy to be forwards compatible. You can add braces and parentheses in 5X code to make it compatible with 7 to have the same behavior. It's a little bit harder to go the other way, but you can. It also means there's a whole bunch of new options available to us, and I'll show you some of those. So here's some examples. So $$ variable, key 1, key 2. Who knows what this does in 5.6? So what it'll do is it'll take everything from that second $sign and evaluate that into hopefully a string, which is then the variable name, which is what the first $sign is called, right? Which is kind of ugly. So this is the old interpretation with these curly braces. The new interpretation is it'll take from left to right, so in $var, that's an array, so it's probably going to turn into the string array, and then it's going to look for these keys under a variable called $array, which doesn't exist, right? So it's really subtle, but it's also uniform. So it means that once you got it, you got it. There's none of these weird rules happening anymore. Other examples, variable properties. I do this one a lot. This is what I said. Variables, yes, we don't do that, but variable properties, I do that. Variable method calls, I do that. These things impact this. So $var, arrow, $prop key. Before, it would look up the array key. That would be the property name. Now it looks up the array as the variable. This is, yeah. I mean, it's good stuff, but it's so subtle that it is going to trip people up. We'll move on from that. As I mentioned, it brings a whole bunch of new syntax. Now, in 5.4, we got array dereferencing on function calls. In 5.5, we got more dereferencing. In 5.6, we got even more scalar dereferencing and stuff like that. With uniform variable syntax, we can basically do a whole bunch of missing combinations. So you can now call a closure that has an array dereference, which is itself a closure, and call that immediately. You don't need to assign it and then call it. You can do an object, which is a callback, an object, an array that contains two objects. It immediately dereference it, so it's a scalar array, not scalar, a literal array, and call a property on it. You could not do this before. Now, I don't advocate that, but it's possible because it is consistent. And then we also have string access, character access. This is something that was not possible at all before. Yes?
You call a function, and then if that function returns an array, you do that.
That's been possible since 5.4, or maybe 5.5, but definitely one of the 5x's.
Really?
Yes.
I thought we couldn't do it in 5.5.
Only arrays. But yeah, now you can do character access as well. You can also do nested static accessors. So an array has a class name in it and access $baz, which is a static variable upon that. You can do that. This one here is in the RFC, but it doesn't actually work. The RFC thinks this will work because it's consistent and it should work, but there's some ambiguity as to what some of these variables mean. Is this $bar from the local scope, or is it a static variable upon the things you do need to add braces and closures? I have it in there because it's in the RFC, but it is wrong. You can now also do a function that returns a class name and then call static methods on that, whatever, right? So these are great. You can also do nested parentheses. So foo returns a closure or a function name. You can call it. Bar returns a closure. You can call it. All of these things that return closures, you can now call the closure immediately, or the callable immediately, which is great. You can also do arbitrary expression dereferencing. So anything inside of braces, and then dereference all the stuff off of it. What that means is, I don't know if you can see down the bottom here, that sort of JavaScript style function closure inside of braces that you immediately call, that's now valid in PHP. I don't know why you do it in PHP, but you can. More importantly, this one here where a property contains a closure, you can just put that inside of parentheses, and then you can call the closure without having to reassign it. EA. You can also dereference scalars. This one's somewhat useless, but is potential for some cool stuff. It means that if we do go for object scalars in the future, we already support the syntax for it. So it's not there yet, but it could be. So string, arrow to lower, right? You can also do it array method callables. So right now, you can define an array, assign it to a variable and call it. That's possible. Now you can call it immediately. Right? This one's well, that one's useful. You can have a string that is a class name, an access. I don't understand why you would do this, but it's possible because it's consistent. Yay! Like PHP consistent, right? It does that. There is one casualty, which is this. Global and variables no longer works. You now have to add braces. I'm hoping nobody's doing this. But if you are, yeah, so just don't use globals. Okay. Any questions so far? No? That's good. All right, so assertions. Who here knew that PHP had assertions with the assert function? Okay, it's a fair number of you. I hadn't really run into them until maybe a couple of years ago. I certainly haven't used them. So the behavior of the assert function has been expanded in PHP 7. It is still backwards compatible. They've added new features. What's really cool is that they can now be turned off completely. So previously it would just not evaluate the expressions that were in them. Now they actually are removed during the compilation phase and they don't exist at all. So there's zero overhead. So you can put them in all of your development code and then turn them off in your production INI file and they just don't exist, which is great. They can also now emit exceptions on failure. That's an option. Before they would emit warnings, which obviously is not this great. Can't catch it, can't do anything with it. You can, but it's a pain. It also now allows for a custom message. So if you use PHP unit and you have, assert whatever, you put a custom message in so you know what the heck you were expecting. You can now do that with assertions. The new INI settings, z.assertions 1 will turn them on and behave like they're on. 0 will disable the warnings and exceptions, but will still be there. It'll still evaluate any expressions that are not inside of strings. Whereas -1 will just completely strip it out. So it's possible to, basically the way the assert function works is if the first argument is a Boolean, then that's the result of the assertion. So if you put an expression in there and it returns true, then the assertion passes. If, however, you pass a string, it will think it's code and evaluate it for you. So with 0, it will not do that evaluation, but obviously the expression still happens. With -1, that does not even happen. And then assert.exception will throw exceptions instead. We'll get to those a little bit because that's a huge change. So if you've never seen it, assert false equals true. It will not be evaluated, sorry, if it's -1, sorry, if it's 0, if that will not be evaluated. If it was outside of the quotes, then you would need -1 to not evaluate it. Warning assert, if it was evaluated, false equals true. This will just tell you what you put in. That's the default message. If you put in a custom message, then it will show that instead. The only thing I don't like is when you get to the exceptions, the code, the assertion is no longer in there. You only get the message. So it's not great, but whatever. All right, so error handling. There were 2 RFCs that impacted this, and it's kind of important to go through both of them, but one of them doesn't matter, and you'll see why. Who here has had a Fluent API that at some point returned a null that you tried to call the next method, right? We've all done this. And prior to 7, that was a fatal error. And because it is so common, they decided it should be a catchable fatal error. We can now, correctly see, make it a catchable fatal error. So that's great. Like that's a really good change. So what it means is you can do a set error handler. You can pass in some sort of callback to do whatever. And if it doesn't bail out, then the code will let you continue running because it's caught, right? So var equals no, call method, it will still run the code that follows it, right? This is great. However, the next RFC that we're going to talk about that's still important, but it actually doesn't matter anymore. Let's kind of see why. Sorry, that made no sense, I understand. Engine exceptions. So this for me is so cool. You can now, because of this change, rather than make a catchable fatal error, it's actually an exception. It's an error exception. So now we can just catch it with try catch. We don't need the set error handler anymore. That goes away. If you want to be 5, 6, and 7 compatible, you need both. But if you're only doing 7, you will pretty much never use set error handler. There are now, I think there's 1 fatal error that's still actually fatal and is not catchable in a try catch block set, which is really cool. So they can be handled gracefully. More importantly, to me, if you have a finally block, that didn't used to get called when you had a fatal error. If you have a register shutdown function or destructors, those were never called on fatal error. With engine exceptions, the whole stack gets unraveled as you've written the code. I think it's really important. I think most people didn't realize that. I certainly didn't realize that until I kind of looked at some of this. So now, like open font handlers and stuff like that will get cleaned up correctly.
Is this on by default or is this something else?
This is on by default. This is the behavior in 7. So in this case, try var equals null, call the method, catch/error, do something with it, but don't die. It'll run the code after. This is just regular try catch stuff. Because they wanted to maintain as much backwards compatibility as possible, rather than extending the exception base class like we would have to do, they added it as a sibling instead. And they now both implement this interface called throw. And what this means is if you have a catch-all/exception in older code, it still won't catch these new errors. And a non-caught exception is still a real fatal error. That's the one that's left. Right? So what that means is this change is actually backwards compatible, which is kind of amazing. Yes, the messages are slightly different because it is an uncaught exception, but it is still the same behavior of being a fatal error if you're not explicitly catching, which I think is brilliant. This only applies to catchables and fatals. Warnings, notices, those are still the old style errors. That's a good thing. Yeah, so basically, as a sibling to exception, you now have error, which implements throwable. These were called originally, I think, had a different name, but I don't remember what they were. I think it was just engine exception, type exception, whatever. That was the original RFC. These are the current names of the ones that are there now. You have type errors, parse errors, and assertion errors. So when I mentioned earlier that assert can throw exceptions, that's the kind of assertion that the exception that it throws. Yes.
Question, are there any tools that would check the existing code for compatibility with PHP 7?
Not that I know of. Your test suite should do that.
Yeah.
Because everyone has one. Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, the back compatibility is very, very minor. And unfortunately, the worst parts are those uniform variable syntax, because they're very subtle and hard to see. I don't know if you, so in 5.4, they added a warning for array to string conversions, and the Drupal test suite broke. And they were like, you broke everything, it's not backwards compatible. And what was actually happening is their test suite was comparing the string array to the string array, and they didn't realize it. They thought they were actually comparing arrays, and that was the only reason the test suite was passing in the first place. Yeah. So that's the type of errors that the, yes?
Just out of curiosity, could you catch a throwable?
Can you catch a throwable? Yes. Yeah, so now the new total catch-all is catch and throwable. There is, I don't think I have slides on this, I'm talking about it anyways. You cannot implement throwable yourself. You cannot add an extra sibling here, which is kind of unfortunate. What you can do is extend throwable, and then extend one of these and implement your extended interface. You can do that, but you can't extend throwable directly because you still only have these two top-level exceptions. Okay. So /error. So these are now thrown instead of catchable fatal errors. There's no BC break because uncaught exceptions is still an actual fatal. There is a small BC break for catchable, which is that you can't suppress the errors entirely with set error handler. That no longer gets called for catchable fatal errors. It is now an actual fatal error because it's an exception that you didn't catch. So that's the one small backwards compatibility break here. But you can have both in there. So if you want your code to be 5, 6, and 7, just have the set error handler and the try catch. And one or the other will be called, which is great. This one's really cool. Parse errors are now thrown when you try to evaluate code that has a parse error. This is obvious, but it's not just for the eval function, it's also for includes. So you can now have try catches around your includes in case there's a parse error. This is great. And also, as I said, eval will also throw this. It took me like 20 minutes to actually come up with a parse error. I don't know what's invalid PHP anymore. But yeah, function $foo, if I try to pull that in, it will throw a parse exception, kind of like this. Has the same sort of syntax error that you would have seen just piped out in the command line before, except it's now inside of a stack trace. So syntax error, unexpected $foo, T variable, expecting identifier, blah, 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 right? This is cool. We now have stack traces to work with. Type errors. So if you have a function that accepts two different objects, compare, and you try to pass something in that is not compatible with those, it will now throw a type error. Instead of, it was a warning before. It depends on what it was. For classes, it was a warning. For something like a string, it would give you, sorry. For classes, it was a fail. For something else, it would be a warning. So yeah, so if you have a class or an interface or whatever there, it will now throw an exception, which is a type error. So it's like this. Argument 1, pass to compare, must be the type of variable, an integer was given, right? Great. Assertion errors, I mentioned this already. If you have assertions, zen.assertions equals 1, and you have them turned on, it will now throw an assertion error instead of a warning, which is way more useful. You can do your logging and all that kind of stuff in there without it being off in some sort of random error handling. So that's great. That's what that looks like. All right, let's look at new features. Like this is the cool stuff. Like that's the stuff that you're going to have to do, deal with, things that have changed. This is stuff that you have not touched before, and therefore it's all greenfield, and hopefully you get to use it in the next 5 to 10 years. The most important new feature in PHP 7 is the combined comparison operator. And I say that because I originally came up with the name, which is tspaceship. I don't know why this, like every single thing that got put out about PHP 7 always mentioned this operator, and I did it as a joke. So, whatever. So I did it for 5.6. Andrea Fault came along, redid it for 7, saw my prior art, and renamed it T-Spaceship instead of whatever the heck she called it. I have a slide in here which is going to be something that I forgot to actually finish it. There's a lot of argument about what kind of spaceship the operator is. Like, is it a TIE fighter? Isn't it an Imperial fighter? Like, no, it's like a standard UFO, like 1960s B movie. that's just, let's get over it. So, it is the first trinary operator in PHP. All of the rest are unary or binary. So they either return true or false, or they have only one operator. So what that means is if you've ever used the strcmp, the string compare function, it will return one of three values. It will return a -1 if the left-hand side is less than the right. It will return a 0 if they are equal, and it will return a +1 if the left-hand side is greater than the right. Same for version compare. There are a couple of functions that do this. So that is what this operator does. It will allow you to compare two things and find out which of them is greater or lesser, or if they're equal in one call. Yes?
Does it deal with type juggling, or?
Yes. So what this actually does under the hood is it will use the less than and equal calls appropriately. So the same ones that you, if you were using those in PHP, which does all the type juggle. So yes, it will type juggle. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. But yeah. So yeah, as I said, I originally proposed it. It was then championed by Andrea, and then finally Stas, which was really surprising to me because he says no to everything new. He's the one that actually got it in after Andrea raged with it. So that was surprising to me, but I'm really happy about it because it makes me look good. So in case you can't see it, it looks like a spaceship. Less than equals greater than. This is
Same as Perl, right?
It is the same as Perl. I stole it from Ruby though because I'd never seen it before. I just thought spaceships, that's cool. It's really only useful for sorting callbacks. I have yet to see any other use case for it. But if you find one, let me know, because I'd like this to actually be useful. So, prior to PHP 7, as I call it pre-spacefaring PHP, you would call is A less than B ternary, return -1, it's true. Otherwise, is it greater than B, return 1. Otherwise, that means they're equal, because it's neither less than or greater than, return 0. That's kind of ugly. Let's just do the simple thing here, A spaceship, right? That's really the only code you're ever going to write with this. So just copy from the slide. Don't include it. This one is kind of cool as well. I like this one because I did this. Riley asked me to write like an upgrade guide for 7. It's not a book. It's just like a free ebook thing. Go grab it. But it allowed me to get the turtle emoji into an O'Reilly book.
Yeah, question.
Yes.
The return value of the spaceship operator,
Yes.
is it specified to be 1, 0, -1, or is it greater than 0, 0?
No, it is 1,
less
0,
than-
-1.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, got an emoji into an O'Reilly publication after that. So the Unicode code point escape syntax. So we didn't get the Unicode that was promised in 6, but that doesn't mean we've kind of been resting on our laurels. PHP does not support Unicode. We have had icon V, and we've had if you have like ICU, there's 3 other things in INCL are in 5 even, and in 6 we've added 7 we've added 1 of which is this, which is the Unicode code point escape syntax. And what it allows you to do is to use /u curly brace and put some sort of code point inside of that to reference any Unicode character. Now, this is slightly different to most other languages. Some of them do have the /u, and then you can put the code point, but they only allow 4 characters because that's like has to be 4 because that's what their parser is looking for. So if you wanted to do like 1, whatever that character is, you'd have to do 0001, right? It has to be 4 digits. In PHP, because we are forward-thinking and we wanted to support things like emoji, so you have the basic multilingual plain, which is everything in those 4 bytes. If you get out of that, you end up in 6 bytes generally, or 5. And obviously those are more than 4. We can't fit them inside these parser restrictions. So in PHP, we have these extra curly braces, but it gives us 2 things. We can get outside the BMP and do things like green heart, and we can remove all those leading zeros. So it can be both more concise and allow us to do more, which is kind of cool. You could also, I don't know about you, if you use, anyone use PHP Storm? Everyone uses PHP Storm? If you put some emoji characters in there, like the font goes nuts. So these are great for that. Another new operator that was added, the null coalesced operator. This is basically the if set or that everyone has been clamoring for forever. If you remember in 5.3, they made it so you could have the short ternary, where you don't put anything in the true, it would just take the expression as the result. But quite frankly, it doesn't work if you're wanting to check if something is set and then return it, right? Because is set will just return a Boolean, not the variable itself. So that's kind of a crappy substitute. So what we've now added is the null coalesce operator, which is the double question mark. What this will do is it will return the left operand if it's not null, otherwise it will return the right operand. It's that simple. Most importantly, it will not raise any kind of notice if it is not set. And it can be nested. So here I have $conf equals $conf, null coalesce. So if $conf is null, then it'll check this conf, so check the object configuration. And if that doesn't exist, check the static default configuration. So this is kind of a fallback configuration stuff, right? This is great. I am not a big fan of nesting these, but it's certainly a lot better than like crazy ternaries and all that stuff. So, yeah.
If you're nesting them, does it always go left to right?
It always left to right, uniform variable syntax. All consistent. Yes, so we'll go left to right. Bind closure on call. So in 5.3, closures were added. In 5.4, they added the ability to, in 5.3, closure, the class was an implementation detail we weren't supposed to rely on. In 5.4, they added some methods to it. They added the object method bind to and the static method bind. And what that allowed you to do was break the object model by changing what $this meant inside of the closure, and by changing the scope from which you were accessing $. You could change those independently. I wrote a very long blog post on, like, this completely breaks the entire object model. This is nuts. And Matthew Finney's the guy behind, like, the lead for Zen Framework. He came in and summarized, like, my 1,200 words in one sentence, which is, yeah. So bind closure on call allows you to just call the closure, call the method, and change what this and the scope has to be the same thing, independent, like with bind and bind to. You can do that while you call it. So if you haven't used these before, bind to and bind will both return a clone of the closure, which is bound in the way that you specify. With call, it will just call the closure with that binding. So you're not doing that extra bit of overhead. Assign it anywhere, it's great. So as I mentioned, this and the scope are whatever the first argument is, which is slightly different from bind and bind to, which will set 2 arguments, so they both must be the same. I still haven't found a use case for this kind of thing outside of unit testing where you want to access private stuff, except, if you come to my talk tonight, you'll see it. I extend Guzzle, and their config property is private, and I want to change it, so I now have a closure that binds to the Guzzle class, so I can now access this property. It's kind of gross, but it works. Please don't. So, here's an example. Class hello world has a private greeting, which is hello. Closure equals function to whom, echo this greeting $whom, which obviously this doesn't exist in this scope right now. If you then do object equals new hello world, call the closure, call pass in object, which is your hello world. If you pass in world, it will be able to access this private property because you have changed the scope and changed what color this points to. This is my second most obfuscated over to your first hello world.
What's your first most obfuscated?
No. My internals under the hood talk shows a very convoluted one with multiple classes and stuff. It's great. All right. This one had a philosophical difference with it, but it's still a nice feature. Group use declarations. Basically, you can now take the common elements of a use statement and stop duplicating them by putting curly brackets and then putting the unique parts inside of said curly brackets. So instead of use framework components of component class A, framework components of component class B as class C, framework component other component class D, you can now just take the framework component bit, which is the common bit between all of these three. This is why I don't like it, that extra slash there, curly brace, and then just put the rest of it inside of there.
Is this stolen from C++?
I have no idea. I don't do C++. But I voted without the slash, and I'm putting that out there. That's on record. I'm not happy with the slash, but whatever. I just kind of figured it was a use statement block. What is that slash doing? I think it's weird. So yeah, so basically this allows you to compress it down. Now, presumably, your IDEs will be able to support this really nicely, and they won't have trouble. The only thing that this breaks is grepability. So be aware of that, because I think that's really important, but, you know, whatever. Also in 5.6, we added the ability to use functions and constants. So if you know that, you can also do that by just doing use whatever and then function and constant in front of whatever you're importing. So that is also there. There are a number of generator enhancements. Who is using generators now? A couple of you? Okay. If you ever use iterators and you're having to define your own, and you're doing a lot of boilerplate, generators are for you. They're amazing when you have the right use case for it. So prior to 7.5.6, they were in 5.6, they could not return a value. Returning a value was actually a parse error. So now they can return a value, and you can retrieve it by calling the getReturn method on the generator. So similar to closures, generators are actually a class under the hood, which is the generator class. So when you call the generator, it returns an instance of the generator class, which now has this getReturn method. Let's see here. Wow, I can go read that one. So function gen yields hello, yields space, yields world, and then returns goodbye moon. Previously, that would have been a fatal error. So now if you do $gen equals gen, for those that don't know, that is the function call, but it doesn't execute anything inside the function. It just creates an instance of that generator class, and when you iterate over that function, it will jump in and out of the function scope at these yield points, which is really, really cool. So if you do for each $gen, which is our generator as value, you echo out, it will echo out hello world, and then you can use this generator getReturn, and it will return the goodbye moon. I have a 3-year-old son, if that's not clear. You can also yield other generators. This for me is really cool because previously you could just have one generator and that was it. And you could call out to other stuff, but like you have to handle all of the sub-generators and all this stuff. It's not that great. With being able to yield other generators, we can now have a little bit more architecture around our generators and kind of refactor stuff out. So basically you use yield from instead of just yield, and you can return any traversable. So whether that's another generator or some sort of iterator, maybe it's a simple XML, people are still doing XML, like all this stuff, you can do that. One thing to be aware of is it does just flatten that hierarchy. And there's no way, so with regular generators, if you have like recursive iterator, you can check the depth. You can't do that with generators. But for those use cases where you just don't care, you just want a list of like a tree but in a list format, you can do that. So here's sort of the same example. Yield hello, yield space, yield world, yield from goodbye. We'll call the goodbye, create a generator, and so it'll go on the iterations. Goodbye will just now yield goodbye space. On the first iteration, it will go through the first 3 yields. Then it will hit that yield from, and it will just continue iterating 4, 5, and 6, give you goodbye. Okay. Anonymous classes. This is cool. This was the longest RFC, I think, even longer than scalar type-ins. Sorry, spoilers. If you get a chance, please read this RFC because it has great use cases. It is a great example of an RFC. So basically, this is like closures but for classes, or rather for objects. So you now do new class, and then the constructor arguments that you're passing in, and then curly brace, and then you would define the class that is that object. So it's really cool for things like value objects and stuff like that. You can do things like namespacing still. You can do inheritance. You can do extends. You can do implementing of interfaces, like all of those features that are available. Traits, they're all available with anonymous classes. They're very complete. There is one caveat, which is that the name internally is based on a memory address of where that class is defined, not the definition of the class. So if you have a loop that generates multiple anonymous classes, they are actually, they are multiple instances of that single class, and therefore if they are the same, they will be identical. They will be, you can actually do equals equals on them. If you have the same definition later on, that will never equal those previous ones, even though technically it has the same contents because it was defined in a different place. I'll show you that to make it more clear.
You're making them anonymous, you just not care if they're equal.
You can care. You wouldn't care in that case probably where you're doing separate things, but I'll show you an example, maybe, whatever. So $object equals new class. As I said, the constructor arguments, the arguments that are getting passed in, get passed there. And then if you have a constructor, they'll be passed into it, and whatever else you want inside of that class. Pretty simple. As mentioned, you can do extending and implementing and using of traits. All of that is supported. Fantastic. This is that memory stuff. So, for example, if I have for each of an array of value instances equals new class extended value object, so it's just passing the value in. I don't know why you would just do value. Presumably you're defining other stuff here. It's a slide. Come on, give me a break. If you then, at the end of it, decide that maybe you want the last one to be special, and you were to do the exact same thing, all of these would be equal to each, well, if they have the same value going in, would be equal to each other. This one, even if it had the same value, would never ever equal anyone from this array. So it's kind of a gotcha. I don't think anyone's going to trip into it, but it is important to know. All right, scalar type ins. This was the argument that's spilled out on Twitter. This is the most controversial feature that ever got to PHP. The ability to type in both function and method arguments with scalars. Ints, strings, floats, and boolean. You can also type in return values, but it's important to understand that that does not just apply to scalars. So you can type in on classes and interfaces as well. So that's not strictly a scalar type in feature. There are two possible ways to run this. The first is non-strict, which will perform coercions where possible. The same way that doing comparisons will coerce stuff around, it will do those same kind of coercions. It also has the ability to do strict, but it works very similarly. Yes?
Oh, no.
Oh, 5 minutes? Not a question. I should get done in 5 minutes. It works very similarly to namespaces, where the file that you declare strict, tell it to be strict, that's the only place where it applies. It does not apply to things that are calling code in that file. It only applies to the calls made in that file. So you as a library author do not get to decide that your library is going to use strict types. But what you can decide is say, I want whatever comes in my function, it's going to be an int. And the author gets to decide if that's a fatal error for them or not. But regardless of whether or not they pass in an int, you will always get an int, regardless of which mode is used. So you can rely on those hints. It's up to your author to decide what their coding style is going to be. I prefer Hack's implementation of scalar type hints, or anything in general. That's just me. So,
Question on what's NAP?
what's what?
NAP, you had that NAP on the slide, you had it.
Which what?
A not a number and tool.
Oh, this is an XKCD comment. Nothing to do with PHP.
Okay,
Yeah, sorry.
That is not a problem.
okay.
Yeah. I didn't even read the comment. It was just short of fun. Function send HTTP status, takes an integer status code and a string message, just calls a header, pretty simple. So in non-strict mode, if we pass in 404 file not found as an integer or a string, great. If we pass it in integer string 403, it just gets coerced into an int, and it's fine. Coercion happens. It does mean that there's potential for loss of data. We'll look at that. So integer 1 being passed into a float will return float 1.0. Okay. Float 1.5 being passed into an int will be int 1. We have some precision loss here. This might be important. Most of us are not curing cancer with PHP. I know one guy that is, but I don't know, it could be important. Be aware of it. If we pass the string 100 in, it will into an int function, it will be turned into int 100, we turn it into a float, it would be 100.0. Okay. If you want to do strict type hints, you use this. Declare strict types equals 1. It must be the first statement in your file after the open tag, that white space. That means it must be before the namespace. So previous to 7, namespace had to be the top thing. Now strict type hints does.
So that's on per file basis, per process?
It's on per file. It's on the call site, not on the define site. So yes, per file. So here we have declare strict types equals 1. Send HTTP status passing in 404 as a number. That's fine. It's fine. If I try to do it as a string, it's going to bail out. So bear in mind that the definition here doesn't know whether it's being called strictly or not. It just knows that it is going to get an int, and it is going to get a string if it doesn't fail error. Okay? If they have strict on it, it's going to wrong thing. So it's really important to get that. And it'll just say, this is one of those type exceptions. Argument 1 passes an empty status, must be the type int, string it. Okay. Return types, as I mentioned, is not just for scalars. And they're defined by doing colon and then whatever the type is after the arguments. Pretty simple. It's exactly the same as hack. We do not yet have a void. That might have passed in 7.1 already. So you can have return void to explicitly say you are returning nothing as opposed to returning null, which are two slightly different cases. So yeah, just fix the arguments with colon. Done.
So why the syntax, and why not following the condition of unlikeliness that where it specified the return type before the name of the function?
Because we already have too many things there. We have static, we have accessors, like people just like hack. This works very well in hack, and maybe it's easier to parse. I don't know, but I like it. I think.
Your
Yeah.
last point on returning void, does that make functions no longer return null by default?
Yes, maybe I'll have to check. In the artist, like if it's passed, it's just passed. I would hope. That would be quite a change, though. Probably that would change. So that's probably not the case. I don't know. Well, no, actually, it means you cannot have a return. That's the difference.
Void means there is no return.
There's no returning function, and that would probably be a
Return of the value that is.
Yeah, yeah. So if you return anything, even if it's a null, that will be a violation of the type int, and therefore, if it's a strict
But if it
type
takes a
exception,
return value of a function that doesn't have a return, it's null.
you can probably do without that. Yes, you just can't have it. Like you can't return something. Even if it's
Okay.
So you're not returning null. It's implicitly returning null as opposed to you explicitly returning. All right. So what's next? As I mentioned, 7 is out. Go use it. If you're not quite there yet, Rasmus has a great Vagrant box. It's Vagrant, whatever. There's also a Docker container. Was Docker 7.9 build? I imagine that's now running the 7.1 9 builds. That's what I use generally. Go PHP7.org, go PHP7 extension. There are still some extensions that are not ready for 7. They're few and far between, and they are the lesser useful ones. If you are using something that hasn't gotten any love in the 5X series in a while, probably didn't get any in 7. Go look at it. Even if you just document the issues, that will help somebody fix it. And let's be honest, if we can get somebody else to do our work, let's do it. Go to the wiki, /rc /php_7.0. That gives you a list of every single RC that got accepted. That is the canonical resource for everything that got in, including decisions behind it, which I think is important. The spec should be up to date, or is going to be up to date soon, which will obviously be the canonical resource for how it works, but not decisions. Any QR codes, so daveyshafik.com/php7 has a bunch of resources that I do keep updated, blog posts, things like that. My slides link should probably be there. This is on to again. I think that's updated. I'm pretty sure it is. So at Shafik on Twitter, me at daveyshafik.com or dshafik@akamai.com. daveyshafik.com/slides is where these will be very shortly. And thank you very much. Is there any questions? All right, I think we're done. Is it lunchtime? Let's go to lunch.